Hi y'all, so today I'm going to be talking about evolution through natural selection. Evolution through natural selection basically happens when one genotype produces more offspring than another genotype due to like an environmental pressure of some sort. And I'll give an example later on so y'all can understand better. But just know it's not random, and basically one genotype is adapting to the environment better so that they're more successful. And an example of this would be in the Galapagos Islands, where we had two types of finches. We had small-beaked finches and big-beaked finches. Just please pretend that these are finches. But anyway, these little guys, they have small beaks, so they can only eat smaller seeds. But these guys, they have bigger beaks, so they can eat harder and bigger seeds. So then in 1977, there came this really big drought over the island, and it reduced the number of small seeds that were available on the island, which caused a lot of these guys to die because of starvation. So the drought was the external environmental pressure that was put on both of these little guys, and they went through a positive selection because they still had their food source and they thrived, while they went through a negative selection because their food source got taken away and most of them died. Then because of the reduced number of these guys, like there was really little of them left, these guys kind of took over and they produced a lot more offspring just because there were a lot more of them. And so then the average genotype trait for finches was now big beaks, so they came out on top. And yeah, that's basically evolution through natural selection. Okay, and now we're going to talk about the three principles that operate in nature that can lead to natural selection. There are three of them, so it's variation, inheritance, and competition. And so we can start with variation. Variation is basically when individuals or like one organism or a couple have varying traits in a population. And these can be positive or they can be negative depending on whether they help or they hinder the population. Basically, an example of this is the penguin isolation lab that we did, where we tried to pick up the little fish with the utensils. The knife, at least for my group, is an example of a variation that ended up hurting the environment because they did not get a lot of fish. That would be a negative selection. But the fork or the fork spoon for my group resulted in us getting a lot of fish, which is good because that's going to help the population. It's going to make them thrive because they have more food, and so that's going to be a positive selection. Then we have inheritance. Inheritance means that the parent determine the traits that are passed on to the offspring. And an example of this is, again, the penguin isolation lab, where the trait that was more successful, so like the fork, would be the one that was passed on to the other row or the next like generation. And then we have competition, and competition is when like several species live in like the same area and they're competing for different things. Usually it's food. Food is a really big one because they have limited resources. And an example of this is something we discussed in class with the Gentoo penguins and the chinstraps. Basically, the Gentoos are a lot bigger. They have more body mass, which means they're able to retain their temperature a lot better. While the chinstrap, they're a lot smaller, so they can't really retain cold temperatures that well. And so they have figured out a way so that they can hunt in different places and get their food from different sources. So the Gentoos usually hunt down deep in like the depths of the sea, while the chinstrap tend to like stay more towards the top. And this caused no competition to arise because, I mean, they figured it out, they adapted to their environment, and they were able to hunt in different places. But this isn't the case for a lot of populations. Usually it ends with both of the populations having negative selections, which means like they both die off because they don't have enough food, but it can also lead to like maybe one migrating to another place or something like that.
Adaptations are traits that increase or decrease the fitness of an organism. Survival adaptations are genetically controlled and can be passed on to successive generations. In this example, we have plants in a desert. The desert is very hot and these plants both need to adapt, but they adapt in different ways. The plant on the left grows longer roots to reach out for more water during rainstorms, and the plant on the right has waxy leaves which retain water and prevent the plant's water from evaporating from the heat. Both these plants are adaptations, just in different ways. The next topic is the different types of evolution. There are two types of evolution: divergent and convergent evolution. Divergent evolution is getting new species. This is because of a common ancestor. And also there are homologous traits shared between them. An example I have is a wolf, which is the common ancestor, and it is evolved into a fox and a dog through divergent evolution, which is creating new species. However, in these new species, the traits will be slightly different, but underneath they are all similar. The next evolution we have is convergent evolution, which means getting new traits. In these traits, there is no recent common ancestor, and the traits are going to be similar in function, but they evolve separately. For example, we have a butterfly, a bat, and a bird. All these three have the same trait, which is wings, and they function similarly. However, they do not evolve together since there is not a common ancestor.
So Charles Darwin was the first person to come up with the idea of evolution known as natural selection, which is where the organisms that are better suited for their environments are more likely to survive and reproduce offsprings. And he came up with this concept of natural selection based off his observations that traits are heritable, so they're passed down from parent to offspring, and more offspring are produced than are able to survive in an environment because of limited resources like food, habitat, or even mates. And offspring vary in their heritable traits, and the offspring in any generation will be slightly different than each other, and different things like shape, color, or size, and the individuals with the helpful traits are more likely to leave more offspring that survived, and over generations the populations will be adapted to the environment. And then one example that we did in class of natural selection were the peppered moths. So before the Industrial Revolution, the moths in England were light colored, and there were very little dark colored moths. And then over time, as the Industrial Revolution came, the dark colored moths were favored, so the light colored moths were selected against, and because the prey could spot them more easily with all the soot and everything, and the dark moths population rose. So unlike natural selection, artificial selection or selective breeding is where humans select for the desirable traits in agricultural products or animals. And during artificial selection, humans choose parent organisms with the specific traits that they want to reproduce. And eventually, over time, and many generations, there is a rise of a new species. So for example, the banana is artificially selected. Way in the past, in the wild, bananas were really small, oval, and had really large seeds, and they were just hard to peel, super unpleasant to eat. But not all bananas were like this, and humans started to realize, oh, I don't want to eat this. I want something that's easier to peel, thinner, longer, sweeter. So they took the bananas with the desirable qualities, the qualities that they wanted, and they planted those seeds to create new banana trees. And eventually, over time, these trees passed down their traits to their offspring, and the desirable bananas continue to grow, and the banana trees with the undesirable qualities just began to disappear. Their survival rate was much lower. Artificial selection happens all the time in nature, intentionally or unintentionally. Humans have continued to sway the course of nature, and most of what we eat has been artificially selected, like the bananas or tomatoes. And same thing with animals. Everything's domesticated, like sheep and chicken, dogs, everything's artificially selected.